Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alexis Dixon. I have the pleasure of introducing you to quite a remarkable woman today. First of all, welcome to Interiors. The show is hosted on Bellevue TV. That's BELLAV TV. The show will be on YouTube at some point, but it will be running live on Facebook initially. Should you miss it, then feel free to go to Bellevue TV and watch the interview. As I said to you, I have the pleasure of introducing you today to Dr. Linda K. Olson. Dr. Olson is an author and motivational speaker with a Get Out and Go message, a professor emeritus of radiology at the University of California, San Diego. She's committed to empowering Parkinson patients and families to live life as full as possible in spite of their disability. She shares personal experiences that are filled with humor, as well as practical tips, resources, and heartfelt motivation. Dr. Olson has been a triple amputee since 1979 and was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2015. She and her husband, Dr. David Hodgins, raised 2 children and now live in San Diego with their black lab, Sally. Today, Linda's work focuses on her Get Out and Go message to promote exercise and getting outdoors for people with Parkinson's disease and physical disability. She's in demand as a speaker and has developed a following in this extensive community. She was recently appointed to the board of directors of the World Parkinson Coalition. Nearly 1 million people in the US have Parkinson's and 60,000 are diagnosed each year. Dr. Olson's first book, Gone, a memoir of love, body, and taking back my life, will be published October 28th, 2020. Parade magazine has listed it as one of the best memoirs of 2020. Dr. Olson, thanks for being with me today.
It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
Thank you. Shortly after you got married, your husband walked into your room as you were in bed, looked at you and said, "I didn't marry your arms and legs, I married you." What caused him to say that?
Well, that was what he said to me in the intensive care unit when we, within 24 hours of having been hit by a train and me having lost my legs and my arm. And what really happened was when I got out of the operating room that night, all I could think of was my life had been turned upside down. And my big 2 worries were, number 1, what was going to be like to live this way? And number 2, what was my husband going to think about it? And I think as the evening wore on and I got into those dark morning hours, I think as much as anything, I worried more about what he was going to think about it, because I knew I could control myself. I was in charge. I didn't know what he was going to say. So I memorized 2 sentences. And when I saw him for the first time, I remember him walking across the room, and this was in an intensive care unit in Salzburg, Austria. He was walking with a cane because he had broken his ankle and was in a cast at the time of the after the accident. And I just looked at him and I said, "I've been thinking, and I'll understand if you don't want to stick around." It didn't take him more than 5 seconds, I don't think. He took my one hand and put it between his, and he says, "I didn't marry your arms and your legs. If you can do it, I can do it." And I'd known him for probably 6 or 7 years by then. And I think I knew him well enough to know that if he said that, he was probably going to follow through on it. And I know a lot of us don't know when we can trust somebody, but I think I knew him well enough by then to know that if he said that, that's what he was going to do. And it just made everything look different from that moment on.
Let's give the audience some context. You had just recently been married and you left to go to Germany. So can we bring the audience back just a little bit so we can kind of give them the beginning of the story?
Well, I'll go back to medical school, which is where we met. We met on the first day of medical school, and I looked around and thought, there's only 7 women in this class, and I'm one of them, and ooh, I might get one of these guys. I thought that a little bit. Anyway, he and I dated through medical school, and we got married in 1977. So the accident was in 1979. So we'd been married for not quite 2 years when we had the accident. So we knew each other pretty well by then.
And you'd left and you'd gone to Germany on holiday. Is that correct?
Yes, Dave's parents lived in Stuttgart. His dad was an active duty Navy. He'd been in the Navy all his life, and we traveled there along with his brother and sister-in-law to spend a family vacation together. And that was our first day of vacation. We'd traveled in a borrowed VW van through Germany. And in fact, the highlight of our day had been stopping in Ulm. That's a city in Germany that had the highest or the tallest steeple in Europe. And we had climbed that day. Dave and Mark and I had both gone all the way to the top of that steeple. And the irony of it is that that was the last thing or the last day I would ever do with my legs. And I think Dave, for the rest of his life, has thought about that irony, is doing such an athletic event and then having no legs anymore.
And so you guys were driving that VW bug around, or the van around, and the van got stuck on a railroad track. Is that correct?
Well, it stopped on the railroad track, and the problem
Yeah, okay.
was there was a train coming almost immediately. It was up in the mountains, so it was difficult to see. It came around a curve. There was a train guard that wasn't really working, which was probably beside the point. But as soon as we stopped, it was almost instantaneous that we could see this train coming toward us. And men got out quickly. They were in the front seat. And the women, we were in the middle seat. And I grabbed the door and tried to open the door from the inside. And I couldn't get it to open. So I rolled over the seat into the front of the van. And when I did that, I fell. And I fell onto the tracks instead of getting on my feet. So Dave saw me and he immediately ran and grabbed me. And he had me in his arms when that train hit the van, and it just threw us apart. So when all was done and said, he was back along the railroad track somewhere. He'd been knocked out, and I was pinned under the van, and I'd had all these amputations, which are just kind of train track amputations. So I was awake. I never lost consciousness. I still had my glasses on. So when everything came to a stop, the engineer backed the train up a little bit. All the German passengers got off and they pulled the van off of me. So all of a sudden I can see people. It was a little weird because I didn't understand what they were saying because it was German. But I thought, well, if I can hear them, I'm alive. And then I realized, well, I'm in Germany, they're speaking German. So that was my introduction to my new life. They had an ambulance there quickly, and they got tourniquets on my extremities quickly enough so that I didn't bleed out. And they got me across the border into Salzburg quickly, and actually had a team of surgeons waiting for me at a trauma hospital in Salzburg. So I was so fortunate. I don't know where else I could have been in the world that I would have had such superb care to land in a trauma hospital with surgeons who were waiting for me and made it work.
It's kind of interesting listening to this story because, that day you had done so much. I mean, you were really at a place where you were not only having a good time, but where had you walked to? You'd walked to what was the building you were in?
The top of the steeple in the
Yeah,
cathedral in Ulm, and the Ulm is
right.
called ULM. It's an old German town in Germany.
Yeah. So having done that day and then essentially ending your day with this kind of accident, must have been just, as you said, you and your husband must have thought, what the heck is going on here? What's happening with our day, right?
Very dramatic.
Very dramatic. And then going into the hospital, waking up and having your husband say to you, I didn't marry your arms and legs, I married you. What did that mean to you when he said that?
You know, I think it was very concrete and it was very important at the time. I don't think I really understood what it was going to mean or um, whether, well, the full impact of it, because it was not only a statement that came from him, but if he was going to put the work into it, it meant that I had to put the work into it. So it was going to be a commitment that both of us would need to work hard to honor. And at that moment, there wasn't anything else to get in the way. I mean, as life goes on, there are a lot of other things that can get in the way, and those commitments sometimes don't seem as important. But right then, it was the most important thing in the world to me, was that there was somebody that was standing next to me that I thought would probably stay. And as you read my book, for the next several months, and even not today, I mean, there are still days you wonder, well, am I, well, you don't wonder if you're going to stay married, but you think about it often enough so that you work to stay married. So I think that was probably the beginning of what I didn't really understand how big a deal it was going to be right then, but it was really important that he had said it, because it.
Yeah, you speak, I'm visualizing that and I'm thinking, what was her journey to acceptance? So, we talk about acceptance, we talk about that as if, well, you just accept. I'm just wondering, you're essentially a new bride. You're in a new, in a country on a holiday, and this uninvited experience has intruded itself on your life, not temporarily, but permanently. What was your journey to acceptance, and how did you eventually accept this new body that now defined you?
Well, it was easy. The first moment of acceptance was easy because once they put me on the gurney, as they got me on, they brought my foot, which was inside my shoe, and they put it on the gurney with me. Then they picked up the rest of that leg and put it on the gurney with me. And I tried to sit up, and how you push down with both your hands, and it didn't work. And when I looked inside this, I had a long sleeve shirt on. My arm had been severed inside, but it looked like it was there. So I could see the extremities that were severed. I mean, it was very clear cut. So my next step in my mind, all the way in the ambulance, was, I'm going to die. I'm not going to die. I'm going to die. I'm not going to die. So it was a lot of back and forth working towards the acceptance. But every time I would forget, all I had to do was look down. So it was not it was a very obvious problem. Having said that, every day I would work really hard after I got back to the United States and was in the hospital to get strong and be able to walk. But every night I would go back to dreaming, and I would dream that I was able-bodied. In fact, it took years, and well, it's been over 40 years now, and I still have some dreams that I'm able-bodied and some that I'm not. But I would swear, I guarantee you that at least for the first 10 years, all of my dreams were able-bodied. I never dreamt as a disabled person. So I think your mind at least my mind during the day, learned how to accept because it was a visual thing. But at night, when my mind was regenerating, or whatever minds do at night, it would go back and continually live in that able-bodied period of my life. So I don't know. I don't know the psychology of that. I don't know the psychiatry of that or the neuro behavior of that, but that was my experience. So.
And how long were you in Germany before you came back to the US?
3.5 weeks. Okay. They've done such an excellent job of surgery that within that 3.5 weeks, all of my wounds were totally healed. I had no drains left in. I had I had scars, but they were dry. I broke my back at the same time. And by that point, that was probably the most uncomfortable part, was I had a couple of vertebral fractures in my lumbar spine. So at 3.5 weeks, we were medevaced back to the Naval Medical Center here in San Diego, which is where my husband was doing his radiation oncology residency. So it's where I became an inpatient. I was a dependent wife because my husband was active duty in the military. And that was the place that we really started working. Because it was interesting, the first 3.5 weeks in Salzburg, forgive me, but it was a lot like being in a fairyland. Our hospital room looked out onto the hill up above Salzburg, the old city of Salzburg, where the fortress is. And when you would look out there, it looked a lot like you were in Disneyland. And it was just, it was a fairyland that we looked at. And it was not realistic. It was beautiful. We were being taken care of. There was not much we could do other than just rest and start healing. So we didn't start the hard work until we got back to San Diego. So my memories of Salzburg are warm. They are feel-good memories. And I've been back to Salzburg, I'm pretty sure at least 4 times since then, because it's a beautiful city, and it's not where I lost my legs and my arms. It's where they saved my life. So we look at it as a beautiful, inviting city still.
Were doctors shocked? Were your doctors in Germany shocked by your psychological disposition? I mean, I'm listening to you speak, and I'm not sensing a horror at this new body that you're in. I'm not sensing a shock. I'm not sensing, and I'm wondering if that was your disposition and how your doctors in Germany responded to this, what seems to be kind of an immediate acceptance to some degree of what was going on. Did they comment on that at all?
They did. They did. In fact, I'm sure we got more attention than a lot of people did because, first of all, we were English speaking and we needed to find people that could speak to us every day. So they would send different people in that were English speaking just to communicate. But the doctors came by a lot more commonly than I think they would have because we were pretty much most of the time we were in a good mood, we were having a good time. And I know that sounds ludicrous in a hospital where
I think you guys were drinking beer. Weren't you and your husband drinking beer while
I,
you were
in the book there is a picture of us drinking beer. In fact, that was one of our wonderful findings when we after a couple days in the hospital, we went out to the entry of the hospital and discovered that in their gift shop they sell beer. Now remember, this is Germany, Austria. And so we started going out every afternoon in the wheelchairs, and we'd spend the afternoon with our books and our friends and family. Mainly it was our family, and we'd have a beer. And I have one of those pictures in the book where you can see the brace that's on me, and I'm all wrapped up in hospital garb, and I look like I'm either drunk or Dave's trying to convince me to drink something. But it was part of our way of trying to minimize the bad things and starting to grab on to the things that we could look forward to doing. But as you ask about the doctors, the night that we left, before we left, the doctors all filed in and they stood at the foot of our bed. There were 5 of them, and one of them spoke pretty good English. And he looked at Dave and I and he said, "We have something we want to say to you." He said, "We've been watching you for the last 3 weeks, and we think that if you had been an Austrian patient, you wouldn't have opened your eyes yet. You'd still be in shock." He said, "We've been watching you. You're happy. I think you're going to go back and do well." He said, "And what we think we've seen is the American spirit."
interesting?
Dave and I just kind of, we were speechless. For these 5 experienced trauma surgeons to look at us and say, "We think you embody the American spirit," and thought, I think we do. I think this is what Americans do. I think we are optimistic. We have a can-do attitude, and we think we're going to be able to overcome or conquer or adapt. And part of what they were watching was us not being beat down, but beginning to accept the fact and starting to adapt. I was learning how to do things with my left hand, and we were making a game out of a lot of things. In fact, that's how we dealt with most of the things I did every day. Was everything was a game. Who can open the milk carton fastest? Can I write with my hand? Who can? So it was constantly picking things that involved everybody. So we were all working together, and it kind of made just not me feel better. It made Dave's parents and my parents and everybody laugh and feel like this was going to work. And that became my job. I did not anything else I could do. I couldn't walk. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't go to the bathroom by myself. So the only thing I could do was get people to laugh or to talk or to think about how we were going to fix things. So that was my job.
You became solution oriented almost immediately. So, what did that mean for restructuring your life? Because you are an outdoors woman, you hiked. I mean, you were quite active, you and your husband, and so you're now back in the States. And so, what does that mean for restructuring a life that is requires significant restructuring.
Well, just to begin with, getting back to the United States and into the hospital where I was for the next 2 months, it was pretty much all focused on physical therapy, because until I could get a set of legs and learn to walk, I felt like I wasn't going to get anywhere. I was determined, if possible, that I wanted to be able to stand up and get out of a wheelchair. I realized that if I had been paralyzed, that wouldn't have been a possibility. So first of all, I was grateful that my injuries were amputations rather than paralysis. I think it's probably human nature to turn around and look at things and say, I'm better off than this. And I felt like I was better off having no legs than having legs that didn't work. So I spent those 3 months almost 3 months that I was in the hospital learning how to walk. Um, Secondly, because I needed things that were positive to take up this place of what I wasn't going to be able to do anymore, I started thinking about going back and finishing my residency. And my faculty I had been doing my radiology residency at the White Memorial Medical Center in Los Angeles, and they sent my radiology books down. And while I was in the hospital, I had a stack of radiology books sitting next to me that I was being encouraged to read every day. And I remember I would pull them out. I would sit there with my one hand and I would turn a page or two and I would just look at it and go, I'd close it and put it back. You can only, I think my mind was only able to do so much. And I think the first thing I had to do was physical therapy. And then I slowly started being able to mentally take on those tasks. And, in a way, it's harder to grab hold of things with your mind than it is with your muscles and your arms. I could get up every morning and go to physical therapy and strap on these legs and walk and do physical, do sit-ups and stuff like that. I could sweat. I could use my muscles to do those things. It's harder, I think, to grab hold of mental issues and make them turn out the way you want. So I focused so much on becoming physically fit as I was slowly taking baby steps back to getting back into my residency program and becoming what I wanted to be. So I don't know, that's kind of a strange answer, but that's kind of the way I think about it.
Well, it's interesting because as you're saying that, I looked at a video of you on YouTube and you do a mean one-hand push-up. I mean, you did 23, 25 one-hand push-ups, and that's amazingly impressive. And even more impressively, you got pregnant shortly thereafter.
Well,
So,
9 months after the accident. My husband will tell you that was not an accident. He said that was his goal. Yeah, we went back 9 months after we had the train accident. We went back to Germany to visit his parents again, and I was walking by then. In fact, we made a trip back down to Salzburg, and we walked into the hospital and met everybody again. And it was a big reunion because this time I was walking in, they could see this young American couple that was alive, and they had saved my life, and I was going to do well. So that was the trip where we got so excited that I got pregnant. So now I had to go back. Now I had a year off of medical leave, and I needed to go back and finish my residency. And the way medical residencies or any residencies work in medicine is you have a very specific amount of time before you can take your boards and finish. And you can't miss it by 3 days. If you do, you will have to take a whole nother year. And I was not interested in doing that. So one of my major goals that first year was to become independent again. I had lived by myself during my residency in Los Angeles while Dave was living here in San Diego. And I just thought, if I can go back and finish my residency living by myself, then I know that I can be myself again. And I had always been an independent person. Dave was very independent. And if I wasn't able to do that, there would be going to be something missing. So that was a big part of one of our big goals. And thankfully Dave had the same attitude, so he didn't think I was abandoning him or ignoring him, but that it gave us both the ability to have our own lives, which is what was important.
How did motherhood change you? Because, certainly you have to be present for a child in so many ways. And so how did you meet the demands of that? And how did that change your attitude? I don't know how you could be any more positive than you had been, but what was the impact of motherhood?
Well, the very first part was it was a very slow weight gain while I was pregnant. So it
Mm.
allowed me to continue to get strong slowly. And I was walking during this period of time. So I just became a stronger walker. So I used that time to practice more physical activity. Having children, and I'm sure it's the same for me as it is for anybody else, but the difference was I was going to just have to learn how to do things differently. And for most of that, it was doing things with one hand. It was more that than not having legs. So it was learning how to change diapers and how to feed babies and dress them and bathe them and things like that with one hand, which you learned how to do. I think what motherhood brought me was uh, a degree of patience that I didn't have before, and a willingness to, well, and this is as they get older, it's not when they're children or babies, learning that you have to start letting them be their own people, that you have to accept them as somebody other than you. And when they're really little, you look at them and say, oh, I see them being such and such. And as they become teenagers and leave home, that's what makes you mature as an adult, because you have to let go and you have to let them be themselves instead of being who I thought they should be or who I wanted them to be. But that's what every parent does. So I think
Mm.
my disability didn't change that part of motherhood. I think the disability was more the physical parts of how you take care of a child. Also, because I didn't have legs, I couldn't chase after my children. I couldn't walk with them. I couldn't take them to the park. So there were a lot of things I had to have other people do with me or for me. And probably that was another mental situation where I kind of had to not spend very much time thinking about the fact that I couldn't walk with them and things like that and do other things. So it was a constant process of accepting the things I couldn't do and finding different ways to do them so that we could do them.
It's interesting because I'm hearing you. This is the first time I've heard you talk about having or recognizing or having to accept some limitation, right? Because since the beginning of this conversation, you've talked about not talking about what you can't do, but always talking about what you can do. And so listening to you as a mother, not being able to chase the children when I go to the park or do some of the things that kind of what mothers would do, and having to resign yourself to that fact. I'm holding that in juxtaposition to you going hiking with your husband and going hike and camping with your girlfriends,
Mhm.
right? And at some point in the hike, your husband, well, I want you to talk about it when you hike with your husband, how you and he navigate the trail in your hikes, because you guys are very much outdoors people. So I'm holding, the limitation and what it must be for a mother to kind of witness this limitation with her child. And at the same time, this mother who goes hiking and camping and all kinds of stuff.
I think it's a constant recognition that being able to say to myself, I can't do this, and quickly letting go of it and asking for help or figuring out a different way to do it. And most of them, I was able to figure out a different way. So when the children were born, I would take care of them by putting them on my lap in a wheelchair. And I would take them even when they were a day old, and I would cram them into the back corner of the right side of my wheelchair where my arm is not, where that absent spot there. And they never ever fell out. They never crawled out. They never jumped out. It was just because I could just kind of hold them in there. So you quickly learn how to do different things. And then you kind of cross that off your mental list of, okay, I can't do this. Now I can do that. Okay, what do I have to learn to do next? And the ones that you can't do, you just, those become the thing in the house that somebody else has to do with you or for you. So,
Did you find you had to let go of certain people that were previously in your life? And did you find you had to invite new people into your life to support you because of your attitude, how you wanted to navigate around this new body you found yourself in? And that there was a process of letting some people go in your life because they didn't support you or wasn't able to accommodate this new body that you had in some way, psychologically, otherwise.
I don't think I had to discard any friends. I think there may have been people who never came around again.
Mm.
And I didn't see that as me discarding them. I saw that as they either were too frightened or they didn't know what to do or they were too busy. And luckily, there weren't very many of those. I think it was hard on most people to come see me the first time because, I mean, I tell people I looked like an egg. If you saw me sitting there, I'm very small without my legs on. I weighed 73 pounds after the accident, after you lose all those extremities. So I think for the most part, most of our friends slowly overcame their fear. And once they came back the first time and saw us, and we sounded the same and we acted the same and we laughed together, they all kind of got on the bandwagon. And they were the people in particular. There were two families that, when our children got old enough to start camping, they became what I call my camping team. And they're the people that got us on our first trip to Yellowstone Lake, where we went paddling a canoe for 4 days to the south end of the lake where there are no people, no cars, no trails, and no motorized boats. And it was an interesting trip because I was still intent, and this was almost 10 years after the accident. I thought it was important to take my legs along. So they would pick me up and kind of sling me into the canoe and paddle all day. And we'd get out at night and they'd haul me out of the canoe and plop me on the ground. And I'd stand up and try and walk with my legs on the sand, which is not easy to do. And I would take my legs off and get on the ground, and I do what I call butt walking, which is just sitting on the ground and scooting along. And it became obvious that that's what I needed to do. So after that first trip, uh, it was so successful. Our son was 5 and our daughter was 8. And the family we went with had a 5-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. She was my college roommate. And we just bonded. I mean, it became clear that this was a team that was going to be able to go a lot of places. And over the next 10 years, we traveled. We did 10-day kayak trips up in Quetico, which is up in Canada. We went to the Missouri River. We went to the Broken Island. I mean, 10 years. I mean, some of those were snow camping trips too at Thanksgiving with dog sleds and things like that. But those are the things that I wanted my children to experience. And so we realized that putting me in boats and kayaks and canoes and going across water is the easiest way to move. I still had to portage to get places. So Dave took a pack, a freighter pack, which is what hunters use. If they shoot a deer and they have quarter it, how are they going to carry it out? Well, they carry this on their back. It has a little shelf on it so that I can sit on it. And the first few times we used it, I kept my legs on. So I had my back up against his back and my legs sticking straight out. We did that maybe on a couple of little short walks and realized it was not the best way, but it finally came to a head on our trip up into Quetico. And we started out, it was over 100 degrees that day. And Dave put on his knee pads because we knew there was going to be rocky places that he was going to have to climb up and balance. We may have gone a mile. And it was terrible. I just finally said, Dave, this is just not going to work. So we stopped and we took my legs off. And they had it had jeans and, tennis shoes or something on. And we just left them alongside the trail. And I butt walked back up and I got on that little backpack thing and he carried me to the next lake and set me down in the mud. And of course, I'm kind of sitting there now in a pair of cute little underpants and a t-shirt, and I'm sweaty and there's a lot of, mosquitoes and everything flying around. And I'm sitting there waiting for everybody to catch up. And all of a sudden, along come two men, and they just burst out laughing. And they just go, "Oh my God, I'm so glad to see the other half of the person that we saw lying along the trail up there," which had been my legs and my shoes and everything just plopped there. And here I am sitting here swatting flies like this. So those are the kind of stories that we have a ton of as we got out in the wilderness, and just kind of figured out. And it was always, every trip was something different that we learned. And that was the one that we learned. We don't take my legs on trips anymore, because once I get out of the car, I can't use them. So I'm either carried or butt walk or paddled around or been on horses. I've been pushed around in wheelbarrows in places down in South America where we didn't have any other way of getting around, and it was just too tough. So every trip you go on, you kind of go, okay, that didn't work. What are we going to do now? So, which is part of the fun of travel. That's true for everybody, I think.
Well, the story doesn't really stop there, because in 2015, you got a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. And so can you talk about that? Was that a point in your life when you thought, what the hell is going on here? I mean, first of all, how was that diagnosed, and how did you mentally deal with that?
It was not an easy diagnosis to make, because I don't have a tremor. I don't have feet, so you can't watch me shuffle my feet. And the typical physical findings of Parkinson's that we've all been taught are tremor, shuffling feet, a masked face where you kind of lose your expression in your face. The other symptoms of Parkinson's that are not as well known but are becoming much more well known are one called micrographia, which is one that I had. Every time I would sit down to write something, my handwriting would get much smaller by the time I got to the end of a sentence, and it became very hard to write. We noticed that I would be reading something to my husband on a trip or in the car, and I'd start slurring my speech, and my lips just didn't quite want to work right. And then, probably most bothersome to me was I kind of developed anxiety, and I had never, ever, ever been an anxious person. And one year, that year at Christmas, I just lost it. My kids were cooking dinner, and I thought they weren't going to get done. And they both went into Dave individually and said, something's wrong with mom. And he said, yeah, we know we've got an appointment to see her doctor. And he sent me to a neurologist. And when Dr. Hauser kind of looked at me after listening to things, she says, I think you might have Parkinson's. And I kind of sat there and thought, well, that doesn't sound right. I don't have any of those things. And then we sat there and talked about it a little bit and thought, maybe that is what I have. And I remember looking at her, and again, this was me coming out again. I said, well, this is not going to be so bad. I can't shuffle my feet because I don't have any feet. And I've got all these wheelchairs that I use. So I guess I can't fall like everybody else does. And Dave says he just looked at me and thought, okay, here goes crazy Linda again, because this is not something you want to be told. But okay, well, if that's what we've got, that's what we've got. But again, this became that next part of the story with Dave. And I remember sitting there, and while I remember getting home that night and thinking, this is just not fair to Dave, because he's already spent 35 years helping me, taking care of me, and doing things together with me. And we had retired, and part of the reason we'd retired a little bit younger than many people, I was 62 when we retired, was that we could keep traveling and do things that we might not be able to do for many years longer. So to be able to sit there and think about a disease that has kind of a downhill course to it was unpleasant. And again, it was unpleasant because I didn't want Dave to get discouraged, and I didn't want him to have to take care of me more than he already does. But he did the same old thing. He said, if you can do it, I can do it. And now I've got 35 years of history at that point to know that he's probably not going to renege on that. So again, I just think, okay, if we're going to do this together, then let's have a good time and let's try and make each other happy, which is, what else are you going to do? I mean, kind of, you have a choice. You can either be angry or sad or vindictive. And what does that do? Nothing. So take that energy and figure out a way to go somewhere or laugh or
Well, what you did with the energy is that you wrote a book called Gone. And can you tell us about the book and what you want the reader to know, why you wrote it, and what you want the reader to know?
Well, I had many people tell me over years that I should write a book, and I kept saying, I don't need to write a book. I've got a great life. I don't need to get out there in front of people. What happened was my daughter, when she was in her early 30s, had long graduated from college, and she took an online writing course and wrote a story that was about me and about being a daughter of a disabled mom. And I was so moved by her writing and what she said. And I think she was 30 years old when she wrote it, that I thought, okay, maybe we do need to write a book. Maybe the impetus is that, sure, we had a big bad accident and things were, not what you wanted, but we now have a family. We can now look back, and maybe what I could do is show people that you can have a family, you can have a normal life, you can travel the world, even if you do have these. Because a lot of books that are written about trauma are written within the first few years. And so you don't know how they turn out. This is a story that shows you 40 years after the accident and shows you wonderful things and shows you funny things and having good times and working your way through things. And I thought maybe that's something that people could benefit from now. But what capped it off was when I got diagnosed with Parkinson's, I was asked to speak at a meeting for the World Parkinson Coalition up in Portland in 2016. And my first reaction was, I'm not going to do that. I've only had Parkinson's diagnosed for less than a year, and I don't know much about living with Parkinson's. I don't have obvious symptoms. And they said to me, no, that's not the reason we want you to do this. You do have Parkinson's, but you've been a successful amputee, and we think that's something that our people with Parkinson's might benefit from. And when we got done with that talk that afternoon, I was overwhelmed by people's response. And the people that came up to Dave and I and just said, we've thought we couldn't do things. We're discouraged about having Parkinson's, but you showed us by the slides of butt walking and all the things that you do and camping that we can still do these things. And if you can do it, I can do it. And that connection really made a big difference to me. I thought, I can show myself up there being disabled. I can make fun of myself. I can butt walk and I can show them how Dave's carrying me on my back. And if it helps one person or 10 people to be able to get back out and have a good time for as long as possible, then that's what I want to do. That's my mission. I want people to find moments that they can be happy in a disease that isn't always pleasant. So that's why the book is out.
Fantastic. I remember looking online and seeing photographs of you and Dave at the beach. And it's a beautiful day and the beach is packed and there's people everywhere. And you want to go into the water. And so Dave just picks you up in his arms and he carries you to the water and puts you in the water, and you're having the time of your life. It's kind of interesting for me in terms of, you use the word normal so much in this conversation, just it's just a normal thing to do. And I'm just trying to figure out, how do we oftentimes manage shame, the whole idea of having a body that by societal definition isn't normal, right? And we live in a very visual world. And how does one manage the shame, the kind of the dance between acceptance and shame, or the dance between acceptance and love, or the dance between acceptance and anger? Can you talk about the dance between those kind of dissonance where I accept who I am? And the backdrop of this, this reminds me of Casablanca a bit, and before I interviewed you, I thought, if there was a song, if there was a piece of music to Linda, what piece of music would I choose for you? So I'm projecting this onto you. And I thought the theme from Casablanca, you must remember this. A kiss is just a kiss.
So, I like that. Well, you
the
don't.
fundamental things apply as time goes by. But when I hear about, go ahead, when I hear of you and your husband, there's this Casablanca-esque kind of unfolding for me. And so there is nuance, there's texture, and there's certainly drama, but the fundamental glue that holds us together is the most extraordinary love affair. So I don't know. I mean, this is all my projections.
Well, I'm going to have to tell Dave your pick of that song, because there is something that we do. When I ride in his car, he has a Toyota 4Runner. He always has a car that is too big for me to get into. And so what we do is I walk, well, when I was walking or however, I get to the side of the car to get in, and I put my back up against the seat because I can't scoot up in. He has to pick me up and put me in the car. And the procedure for that is he comes up next to me and I kiss him. And that's like pushing the elevator button so that I can, now he lifts me up and puts me in the car. And it's such a habit. And we've been doing it for so many years that if my kids are around and they're thinking they should put me in the car, they're always afraid that I'm going to kiss them, and I try not to pretend that I don't do that. But yeah, that's been, and people have seen us do that for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And it's part of the little, it's the little things that you do to make things fun. And it becomes part of, it's a ritual. It's just a ritual that you do. So I think your pick of kiss is just a kiss. We have a lot of those. Yeah. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
I like your description of the dance, because it is a dance. Being a woman and losing your persona, your looks, is devastating. And when Dave took me to the beach for the first time, probably 2 or 3 months after the accident, and carried me down to the beach here at Scripps, made me wear a bikini, made me take my shorts and shirt off so that I sat there in the beach chair. And I was really, first of all, I didn't want to do it. Secondly, I thought, okay, he wants you to do this. This is important to him. Give it a try. And I didn't want to look at first. And then I thought, well, he started talking to me and we played with a Frisbee, because Frisbee was a game we'd always played. So there's a distraction. And so everything we did that I had a sense of how my body didn't look anymore, there was always something else nearby that distracted us from it. And it took years. It really took a long time for me to think it was okay to go out in public. I go anywhere now without my legs on, or people carry me and stuff like that. But I finally decided it wasn't my problem. It was somebody else's problem. If people didn't want to see me without my legs on, well, then they just shouldn't look. But that doesn't mean that I can't go out to eat in La Jolla without my legs on. I'm past all that, and I'm not going to let other people's problems become mine. So that's kind of my way of looking at the dance.
Yeah, I love the dance of self-love, that I'm not a problem, that the idea of me accepting myself is me accepting myself without the need for external approval, that I fully accept who I am without the need for, it sounds so freeing. It sounds like the emancipation of the self, that I choose to be free and I choose to accept me. And if you don't, I also free you to not accept me also. Mm-hmm. And there's something very emancipative of that internal narrative and that internal self-talk. There's something quite lovely about that.
Yes, and I'm sure it is made easier for me because I have somebody who loves me and who tells me that every day. I love you, you're beautiful. I can't imagine living without you. I mean, constantly. So I think that helps with your self-esteem. But even if I didn't have that, I think the older you get and the more successes you have in life, or the more experiences that you have in life, that comes along, even if you don't have a strong person in your life.
What has life taught you? You were quite young when you got married. I mean, this certainly is not the life you signed up for. When you dreamt of your life as a young girl and became a doctor, a radiologist, and doing all the things you were doing, this certainly wasn't part of that dream. And here you are, fully seated in who you are right now. So what has life taught you?
Well, first of all, it's taught me that you can't predict what's going to happen. And I think when people see me with a disability, one of the things I've always wanted them to realize is this could be you. So treat me like you would like to be treated. And what it's taught me is just what we were just discussing, that I'm a strong person. I'm as strong as I let myself be, and that I've learned to accept people helping me. I've learned to ask for help. For being such an independent person, I'm also very dependent. So the dichotomies in my life are striking. And I guess having those dichotomies is actually part of the charm of my life, because I have so many opposites in my life that um, I'm never bored. If I can't figure out something to do, there's always something that I can learn. And in fact, because I've been disabled and I've had to do so many things differently, one of the latest things is I've decided I'm going to learn how to do watercolor. I can't do any art at all, but it's kind of like, well, when you run out of things to do, it's my job to find something new to learn or entertain or do. So I think that's another thing my disability has taught me, is to become more self, not reliant. What's the word? Push myself. Self. I'm missing a word here. Not relying on other people to tell me how to do things or what to do, but to be able to do things on my own. So that's kind of a garbled way to give you that answer.
What I want to do is also ensure that I recognize your other child, your son. We've talked about you having a child, but you've got two. You've got a boy and a girl, I believe. And so I want to just acknowledge that you had two children. How are they doing?
They are doing awesome. Our children were born exactly 3 years and 2 weeks apart to the day. So we always got that idea to maybe have another kid at the same time of year. So usually on vacation, I think. But our son, Brian, is 36, and he actually just finished a surgery residency and is doing a fellowship up at USC in Los Angeles, and has a beautiful young new wife. And our daughter, Tiffany, who's now 39, has a gorgeous 14-year-old daughter. And both of them are in places in their lives that make us feel good. Being able to step back a little bit more and see them as friends rather than trying to raise them as children anymore. And they're some of the best people that you'd ever want to meet. We love having them as our children.
I can't imagine with a mother and father like you, like you and your husband. I can only imagine how dynamic they are. If you had one word to describe your life and your journey to date, because it's certainly much more to do. I know you have more dreams, but if you had one word to describe your life, what would that word be?
Awesome. That's easy. Awesome. It's been an awesome life. It may be a better life than I would have had without being disabled. And a lot of disabled people will say that to you because they learn to appreciate life a lot more. They have a lot more relationships with people than deeper relationships than they might have had otherwise. Would I like not to have had it happen? It did. So I don't think about that anymore. And I just think that I probably have had a better life than most people. So.
Ladies and gentlemen, the book is called Gone, a memoir of love, body, and taking back my life, by Dr. Linda Olson, a phenomenal woman. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, and go have a good day. Get out and go.
I will. And the book is, when is the book out? The book is going to be out when?
Tuesday, October 27. Yes.
Say that again. We lost you a little bit there.
It'll be out next Tuesday, October 27. Okay. Anywhere you can get a book, you can order it.
Are you going to be doing anything local? Will it be at Warwicks or anything like that?
Warwicks are my favorite independent bookstore down in La Jolla has invited me to do an author interview with them. It'd be online live on Tuesday at 5 p.m. So if you go to Warwicks, and there'll be a website there, and there's a little button you can push that says live interview, and we'll be there together. So join me. It'd be fun.
Thank you, Dr. Olson.
Thank you.
All right.